My wife betrayed me with a 21-year-old, exposed our family to disease, destroyed our marriage, and I had to fight relentlessly to protect my children and secure justice. I'm a 45-year-old father of four, and until recently, I thought I had the kind of life most people envy. My wife, Laura, and I were each other's first everything. First kiss, first love, first heartbreak, and first, and only, serious relationship. We got together when we were barely adults, and somehow, against all odds, we stayed together through our 20s, bought a home in our 30s, and built what I thought was a rock-solid marriage. For years, I wore our history like a badge of honor that I used to tell friends that there was something special about being with the one person who had seen every version of you. The broke young kid scraping by at his first job, the nervous new dad changing diapers in the middle of the night, the man who built his career and took pride in providing for his family. Laura was there for all of it. She wasn't just my wife, she was my partner in everything. I believe that if anyone understood loyalty and commitment, it was her. We built a family together, and our kids became the center of our universe. Or, so I thought. Daniel, our oldest, is 21 now, in his third year of college. He's ambitious, sometimes stubborn, but a good kid. Emma, 17, is sharp, sarcastic at times, and never afraid to call out hypocrisy. She's the type who debates teachers, just for the sport of it. Jacob, 13, is quiet and thoughtful, almost too mature for his age, though he has this innocence that makes you want to protect him from the world. And then there's Lily, 10 years old, our baby. She still leaves little drawings taped to my office door with "I love you, Daddy" scribbled in bright markers. She's pure joy in human form. From the outside, we looked like the model family. We hosted barbecues, celebrated birthdays with too much cake, and took summer road trips where the kids fought over playlists and snacks. Neighbors, coworkers, even extended family. All of them looked at us like we had figured out some secret to lasting happiness. And I believed it, too. For years, I honestly thought my marriage was unbreakable. Sure, we had the occasional argument about bills, the kids, or stupid things like me forgetting to take the trash out. But I always thought those fights were normal, part of the rhythm of married life. What mattered was that, at the end of the day, we'd always circle back to each other. I trusted Laura with my life. I never once questioned her loyalty. Maybe that's why what I eventually discovered didn't just hurt me. It rewrote my entire past. Suddenly, every smile, every "I love you," every family dinner was tainted. Because once you find out your partner isn't who you thought they were, it's not just the present that falls apart. It's every memory you thought was safe. It started with something so small, I almost brushed it off. A couple of months ago, I noticed this faint rash on my arm. At first, I thought it was just an allergic reaction, maybe to the soap or laundry detergent Laura had switched us to. But then Jacob, my 13-year-old, complained about itching in the same spot. Emma mentioned something similar a week later. Even Lily, my youngest, scratched at her arms during dinner one night, tears welling up in her eyes because it wouldn't stop. That I remember standing in the bathroom, looking at the faint marks on my skin, feeling a strange unease creep into my stomach. It wasn't just me, it was spreading through the family. That's when my brain started turning over possibilities, most of them harmless. Bed bugs, allergies, something in the water. But when I casually brought it up to Laura, her reaction made my skin crawl in a way the rash never could. She brushed me off way too quickly. "It's nothing," she said, avoiding my eyes as she folded laundry. "Probably just dry skin. Don't overthink it." That should have calmed me down, but instead, it lit a spark of suspicion I couldn't put out. I knew her tells. Laura was terrible at hiding things. When she lied, her voice got softer, almost rehearsed, like she was reading from a script. That's exactly how she sounded. That I tried to let it go. God knows I wanted to. But the unease kept growing, especially as more of us started showing the same symptoms. It wasn't normal. Something was off. The first time the thought crossed my mind that this could have come from her, I pushed it away so hard it almost hurt. This was my wife, my partner of over 2 decades, the mother of my children. Why would I even think something so disgusting? Still, the pieces didn't fit. And once doubt crept in, it refused to leave. Every little odd behavior I'd ignored over the past year suddenly came rushing back. Her late nights at work that didn't add up, The way she hid her phone screen when I walked into the room, her sudden new interest in going for walks alone. At the time, I chalked it up to stress, maybe a midlife crisis. But now it felt like the universe was mocking me for being blind, that I couldn't prove anything yet. But deep down, something in me already knew my life wasn't as perfect as I thought. The rash was only the beginning. Within weeks, every single one of us had some kind of symptom: burning, irritation, discomfort that no over-the-counter cream could fix. I ended up taking the kids to the doctor, one after another, because they were too embarrassed to talk about what they were experiencing. The diagnosis hit me like a punch in the gut. The doctor called me in after Lily's checkup, his face tight, professional, but there was something in his eyes that gave him away. He said it gently, almost like he was speaking to someone who had no idea how the world worked. It looks like she's contracted an STD. A very common one, but still. I just sat there, numb, the words bouncing off me like they belonged to some other life. An STD? For my 10-year-old daughter? For all my kids? For me? That was impossible. We were a family, a closed circle. There was only one possible way: this infection had made it into our home, and it wasn't through me. Driving back from the clinic that day, I felt like my entire world had tilted sideways. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The kids chatted behind me, blissfully unaware of the bomb that had just gone off in my head. I wanted to scream, to demand answers right then and there. But instead, I forced a smile, told them we'd get this sorted out, and drove in silence. That night, when I confronted Laura casually about what the doctor said, I watched her face drain of color. She stammered, tripped over her words, then suddenly flipped into anger. "Are you accusing me of something? Do you realize how insulting that is?" She snapped, slamming the dishwasher door. It was textbook deflection, and it made my stomach turn. I didn't push her further in that moment. Instead, I just stood there, pretending to back down, but in my mind, gears were turning faster than ever. If she thought I was going to swallow this, she had no idea who she was married to. After that night, the air inside our home became suffocating. I couldn't look at Laura the same way anymore. Every movement she made, every word she spoke, I analyzed through a different lens. Where I once saw the woman I trusted implicitly, I now saw cracks, tiny inconsistencies that I had ignored before. She started staying late at work more often, claiming extra shifts or urgent paperwork. At first, I accepted it, but once suspicion rooted itself in my mind, her excuses sounded hollow. One evening, she came home nearly 2 hours later than usual, her hair slightly damp, clothes a little too wrinkled. When I asked if it had rained, she froze for a second before answering, "Yeah, a drizzle." But the weather app on my phone told me it had been clear skies all evening. Even her phone habits changed. Laura used to leave her phone lying around without a second thought. Now, it was practically glued to her hand. She would angle the screen away from me when she texted, step into another room to take calls, and even bring it into the bathroom with her. One morning, while she was in the shower, I casually reached for her phone on the nightstand, only to find it password protected for the first time in our marriage. But the most haunting moment came from something small. I walked into the laundry room one Saturday, carrying a basket of clothes, when I saw a shirt I didn't recognize crumpled in the corner. It wasn't mine. It wasn't our son's. It was clearly a man's shirt, cheap brand, too small for me. When I asked Laura about it, she said she borrowed it from a female coworker for a project and forgot to return it. My gut twisted. Her answer didn't even make sense. The doubts grew heavier when our oldest son, Ethan, pulled me aside one afternoon. His face was pale, and he looked uncomfortable, like he didn't even want to be having this conversation. "Dad," he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, "Mom's been acting weird. Like, I don't know, sneaky. She sneaks out when she thinks no one's paying attention." Hearing it from Ethan felt like confirmation of everything I feared. My children, my innocent kids, were caught in the middle of this mess, and the thought of them looking at their mother differently because of her choices burned me alive inside. I didn't want to lash out without proof. Accusations without evidence could blow up in my face. But one thing became painfully clear. Laura was hiding something, and I was done pretending otherwise. I made a decision. If she was going to live a double life, I was going to expose every detail of it. Quietly, methodically, and when the time was right, She wouldn't even see the blow coming. From the moment I decided to uncover the truth, I knew I couldn't rush. If I confronted her too early, she would twist it, paint me as paranoid, maybe even convince the kids that I was imagining things. No, I needed to be smarter, patient, precise. The first step was research. At night, when Laura fell asleep, clutching her phone to her chest like it was oxygen, I sat in my office with my laptop glowing in the dark. I read about digital surveillance, about how data traveled through home Wi-Fi networks, about ways cheaters left behind trails they thought were invisible. I wasn't an expert, but I was determined to become one. It was during one of these late-night searches that I came across a small cybersecurity firm nearby. Their pitch was simple: helping families secure their digital lives by monitoring online traffic. It was perfectly legal, perfectly clean on paper, but what I wanted to use it for was far more personal. I scheduled a consultation under the pretense of wanting to protect the kids from online dangers. The meeting was eye-opening. The specialist, a calm man in his 30s with sharp glasses and a clinical way of explaining things, told me they could install monitoring software directly on our router. That meant every message, every photo, every login from any device connected to our Wi-Fi could be tracked. Emails, chats, even hidden apps that masked activity. He assured me, it's discreet. She'll never know. I left that office with a contract signed, a pit in my stomach, and a fire in my chest. I couldn't believe it had come to this, me spying on my own wife. But the alternative was worse, staying blind while my family was slowly destroyed by secrets. Over the next week, I kept up appearances. I laughed at the dinner table, helped the kids with homework, pretended not to notice when Laura slipped outside to call a friend. Inside, though, I was counting the days until the system was installed. Every fake smile she gave me only fueled my determination. And then, one quiet Tuesday morning while the kids were at school and Laura was at work, the specialist came to the house. We sat together in the den while he plugged into the router, typing commands with a speed that looked almost alien. Within half an hour, he turned the screen toward me and showed me the dashboard. From here, he said, you'll see everything. When he left, I sat there staring at the empty login screen. My heart was pounding. Part of me wanted to slam the laptop shut and never look. What if I was wrong? What if I was about to shatter my marriage over paranoia? But another part, the part that remembered the doctor's words, the hidden shirt, the locked phone, the STD diagnosis, knew damn well I wasn't wrong. So that night, once Laura drifted off to sleep beside me, I crept back to my office, entered my credentials, and opened the portal to her secret world. What I saw in those first messages almost made me vomit. The dashboard loaded like a heartbeat monitor, spikes of activity, device names I recognized, timestamps marching in ruthless chronological order. At first it was just noise, a flurry of harmless traffic from the kids' tablets, my work laptop syncing email, Emma's endless streaming queue. Then I filtered the view to Laura's phone, and the screen snapped into focus like a camera lens. Locking on target, there it was, a web session for a messaging app she never mentioned using. Not iMessage, not SMS. A browser tab tethered to our Wi-Fi, quietly piping conversations into the night. I clicked, and the transcript unfurled him. You free after close? I can swing by the lot. Her, 15 minutes. I'll bring the excuse. Him, you always do, L. He didn't even bother with a real nickname. Just the initial like they were co-authors in some sleazy novella. My hands went cold. I scrolled, photos blurred into the thread, faces half-cropped. The inside of her car, the banal fluorescent ceilings of her workplace, the top corner of our bathroom mirror. My stomach lurched at that one. The metadata ticked like a metronome. Time, date, RIP. A map tile flickered. He dropped a pin near the back entrance of her building. Another message, timestamped 11:42 p.m., on a night she told me she was doing inventory. Her, parked by the dumpsters. Cameras don't catch that angle. Him, you're a pro. Her, don't flatter me, kid. Kid. The word detonated in my head. I scrolled faster, heart banging in my ears. Somewhere, a week earlier. Him, can't believe you guessed my age on the .lol. Her, it wasn't hard. You act like my son's friends. Him, 21 and thriving. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping the floor so loudly I winced. 21. Same age as Daniel. Same gap between them as between a child and a parent. Something inside me recoiled. Revulsion, grief, a humiliation that sat hot and heavy in my throat. I stood, paced to the doorway, then came back and forced myself to keep reading. I needed the truth, not a sanitized version I could live with. They had their routines. After shift meetups, walks around the block that were really detours to his beat-up car. Midday breaks coordinated down to the minute. She joked about being careful, then complained when careful took too long. He called her Elle and sometimes Mars, short for her maiden name, I realized. And once, God help me, Mama. I stared at that word until the letters blurred while rising. Not because it was a kink, but because of how grotesquely close it slithered to the reality of our family. Under a separate tab, the router logs showed device handoffs, her phone jumping from cellular to our Wi-Fi as soon as she came home. And the conversation never stopped. She would slip into the bathroom, run the shower for cover, and type. When I filtered by time window, I watched our household play out in parallel tracks. Lily's tablet streaming cartoons at 7:18 p.m., Jacob's game server pinging at 7:19, my work VPN at 7:20, and at 7:21, Laura's browser session pushing another message to him. Her. Kids are downstairs. Quick. Him. You're bad for me. Her. I'm bad for everyone. If there'd been a mirror in my office, I think I would have seen a different man staring back. Someone older than 45, someone hollowed out. I printed nothing. I took screenshots, saved copies to an encrypted drive, and emailed backups to an account I'd created that morning. My hands shook so hard I had to steady them against the desk. Then came the first real photo of him. He'd sent a selfie from the stockroom, flippant grin, a thin chain, a uniform polo with the same logo Laura wore. 21, maybe 22 if he was lying up. Cocky, barely out of boyhood. I zoomed in, cataloging details like a detective I never trained to be. Tattoo lines peeking under his sleeve, the corner of a name tag turned away from the camera, a distinctive scar on his knuckle. Evidence. Not for revenge. For the record. For when the time came. Their chat turned uglier the deeper I went. Not in explicit detail. I refused to let my mind stage the scenes, but in contempt for the life we'd built. Him. Does he still think you're at yoga? Her. He always thinks the best. It's cute. Him. You're bad. Her. I'm efficient. I felt something fracture. I had loved the part of Laura that was capable, organized, unstoppable. Seeing those same traits twisted into deception made me nauseous. She wasn't flailing. She was orchestrating. Efficient, near midnight, a different kind of message, short, anxious. Her. We need to be more careful. I think he's suspicious. Him. You worry too much. Old guys never look. Her. You have no idea what he'll do if he finds out. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and stared at that last line until the cursor stopped pulsing. She did know. Not the details, not the router or the logs or the file tree I'd already built in my head, but she knew I wasn't a man who took lightly to betrayal. And still, she kept going. When I finally closed the laptop, the house was silent. Down the hall, I heard Lily roll over in her sleep. Somewhere, the fridge hummed, indifferent to the catastrophe blooming in our walls. I stood, turned off the light, and let the darkness come. The truth was out. I had seen enough to know this wasn't a slip or a lonely mistake. It was a pattern, a choice. And if she was willing to choose this, then I was willing to choose something else, to become meticulous, patient, and very, very quiet. After that first night of reading their messages, I couldn't unsee it. Every glance Laura threw at her phone during dinner, every excuse to run to the store, every sudden laugh while she stood at the sink. Now I saw the wires connecting her to him, like I was watching a puppet show. But I forced myself into silence. Confrontation would give her the upper hand. What I needed was the kind of evidence no lawyer could twist that I doubled down on monitoring. Every night, I logged into the dashboard, combing through logs like a man searching for landmines. The chats grew bolder. They joked about me, about my job, about how clueless I was. Her. He still doesn't suspect. He thinks the rash is from the gym showers. Him. That's hilarious. Dude has no clue what you're doing in those showers. Her. Shut up, you're terrible. I slammed my fist on the desk so hard the pen holder toppled. They weren't just mocking me. They were mocking the family, the trust we had built. I forced myself to breathe, to screenshot instead of scream, but one exchange froze me to the core. Her. Sometimes I wonder if we pushed it too far. What if the kids, relax. Kids bounce back. Besides, you said your oldest is practically my age. But he's seen worse. Her. Don't even joke about that. Him. You like it though? Admit it. That was the moment I realized. It wasn't just betrayal. It was depravity. She had crossed not only marital boundaries, but moral ones. The very thought of her bringing that filth into our home, around our children, it made my stomach churn that I knew watching messages wouldn't be enough. If this ever came to court, I needed undeniable proof. So I hired a private investigator. A quiet man named Harris, who looked like he'd stepped out of a black and white detective film, gray suit, thinning hair, a voice like gravel. When I told him what I suspected, he didn't bat an eye. You're not the first, he said. You won't be the last. Give me a week. True to his word, Harris delivered. Photos of Laura's car parked behind the store long after closing hours. Blurry shots of her and the boy slipping into his rusted sedan. Time-stamped logs showing visits to cheap motels off the highway. And the piece de resistance. Medical records he managed to obtain, confirming the boy had been treated multiple times for sexually transmitted infections. When Harris slid the folder across my kitchen table, I didn't open it right away. I just sat there, staring at the manila cover, the weight of it pressing down on me. Proof. More than enough. I had everything I needed to crush her in court, to protect my children, to strip her of any pretense of respectability. Still, when I finally opened it, my hands shook. Seeing the grainy images of Laura with him, laughing, kissing, pressed against him like a teenager with a first crush, was a pain sharper than any knife. But that pain hardened into something else. Resolve. She thought she was playing a game. In the shadows, she had no idea I was building a case brick by brick, evidence stacked higher than she could ever climb. And when the moment came, I would bury her with it. With Harris's evidence in hand, I knew it was time to move beyond observation. Spying, screenshots, and secret logs had given me clarity, but clarity alone wasn't enough. I needed the law on my side. I needed to ensure that when the truth came out, Laura wouldn't have a single opportunity to manipulate the narrative. I scheduled a meeting with a family law attorney I had researched meticulously. A woman named Rebecca, known for handling high-conflict divorces and custody battles with ruthless efficiency. Her office smelled faintly of coffee and leather, and she greeted me with a professional smile that didn't soften when I explained the situation. I want everything documented, I told her. Messages, photos, medical records. Anything showing that my wife has not only betrayed me, but endangered our children. Rebecca nodded, taking notes with a precision that made my stomach settle a little. You're going to need as much corroboration as possible. It won't just be about the affair. You'll need proof that the children's well-being was at risk. This will strengthen your case for full custody and ensure her access is limited. We went through the evidence, one by one. Each screenshot, each time-stamped entry from the router logs, every photo Harris had collected, it all painted a detailed picture. I felt an odd mix of relief and bitterness. Relief that I wasn't imagining things. Bitterness at the enormity of her betrayal. Rebecca recommended I continue monitoring, legally, to avoid any gaps. She also suggested preparing financial documents, proof of assets, bank statements, property titles, so she wouldn't have room to claim an unfair share. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. After months of uncertainty, suspicion, and quiet horror, I finally had a plan. Step by step, the pieces were aligning. Proof of her infidelity, proof of the risk to our children, and a path to protect everything I had built with them. I left her office with the folder clutched to my chest, the weight of it grounding me. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, I knew I could win. That night, I went home, tucked Daniel into bed, kissed Lily's forehead, and hugged Emma and Jacob tightly. They had no idea how close we were to the storm about to hit our family, and I intended to keep it that way, protecting them while ensuring justice was on our side. Once the legal groundwork was laid, I turned my attention to him, the boy who had upended everything. I wanted to know everything, his background, his habits, his vulnerabilities. Harris worked discreetly, like a shadow moving through the edges of our lives. Within a few days, I had a full dossier. His name, his family, past addresses, social media accounts, and most importantly, his employment records. It turned out he and Laura worked at the same car rental company. He was barely a manager trainee while she had seniority. Beyond that, Harris managed to dig up a pattern of recklessness, parties, casual hookups, and visits to clinics for treatment of multiple STDs over the past few years. It was the kind of lifestyle that made my skin crawl, especially knowing how close he had become to my wife. One report made my blood run cold. He had once been caught sneaking into an apartment with another woman under false pretenses. The detective had tracked him through a series of rental agreements and witness statements. That, combined with medical confirmation from his doctor, who reluctantly verified prior treatments for sexually transmitted infections, painted a picture of someone both reckless and deceitful. The nastiest part? I realized how reckless Laura had been. She wasn't careful. She was flippant, selfish, almost gleeful in her disregard for our family's safety. This wasn't an affair in secret. It was a public health hazard. My children had been exposed, and the thought that she had knowingly endangered them, made my stomach twist. Every detail I collected went into the case file. Evidence for the lawyer, evidence for the court, evidence for myself to remember exactly what I was up against. This wasn't just betrayal. It was moral corruption, the kind that could destroy a family if left unchecked. And while I processed the horror of it all, I kept the mask of normalcy on for the kids. Dinner table chatter, homework sessions, bedtime stories, they all went on as usual. But beneath it, I was calculating every step, every move Laura might make, every loophole she could try to exploit. That I wasn't just preparing for divorce. I was preparing for a reckoning. That I knew that to win, I needed more than messages and screenshots. I needed a record of her behavior in the real world, her lies, her sneaky excursions, every interaction that hinted at her betrayal. I started taking notes daily, cataloging the times she left the house, the excuses she gave, the patterns that emerged. Harris set up discreet surveillance on her commute from work. Photos of her meeting him outside the office, sometimes with the car engine running, sometimes walking down alleyways. Each image was time-stamped, cross-referenced with router logs and message threads. It painted a horrifyingly consistent picture. She was deliberate, consistent, and unapologetically reckless. Even the smallest details mattered. I documented her phone habits, the way she locked it when she was around me, the sudden deletion of messages when she thought I wasn't looking. I kept spreadsheets of every anomaly. Times she claimed to be at work, yet the logs indicated she was elsewhere. Days she said she was shopping, yet the car GPS told a different story. Meanwhile, the children remained blissfully unaware. At dinner, I laughed at Emma's jokes, helped Jacob with his math homework, tucked Lily into bed, and kissed her forehead. No hint of the storm brewing in our lives could touch their innocence. My heart ached to think they had been exposed to something so vile without knowing it. I also began cross-referencing the information from the private investigator with financial records. Every trip she took, every unaccounted purchase, every expense was noted. This would be crucial when it came to divorce proceedings. I intended to ensure she would not manipulate assets or hide wealth. By the end of the week, my notebook was filled with detailed observations, timelines, and photographic evidence. I had a system that left no room for doubt, no room for her excuses, no room for legal loopholes. When the time came, I would have everything I needed to strip her of any leverage. And through it all, I kept up appearances at home. Laura laughed, teased, and acted as if nothing was wrong. She had no idea that I was watching, documenting, and preparing to ensure that betrayal would cost her everything. With every piece of evidence meticulously cataloged, it was time to take the next step. I met with Rebecca again, this time armed with a full dossier, screenshots, surveillance photos, medical records, and detailed logs of Laura's absences and suspicious activities. I could see the moment her eyes widened as she realized the sheer weight of the evidence I had amassed. "We can move forward," she said, her voice steady but tinged with satisfaction. "We'll file for divorce, full custody, and limit her access. She won't have a chance to manipulate anything." I nodded, though inside, I was still processing the enormity of it all. This was the woman I had loved, the mother of my children, the person I had trusted implicitly, and now, every fiber of our shared life had been corrupted by betrayal. At home, I started to subtly prepare the kids. I didn't tell them the sordid details. They were still too young to process it, but I began planting seeds. Conversations about change, about how sometimes adults make mistakes, about the importance of truth and honesty. I focused on building trust with them, ensuring that when the upheaval came, they would feel safe and supported. Meanwhile, I began the paperwork. Bank statements, property deeds, evidence of the children's living expenses, and all financial documents were organized and duplicated. I even started drafting the custody plan, ensuring that their education, health, and emotional stability would be prioritized. Everything had to be airtight, and all the while, I kept observing Laura. She remained oblivious, laughing at dinner, helping with homework, pretending everything was normal. But I knew her routines intimately now, the time she would leave, the places she would go, even the coded language in her messages. Every act of her duplicity was being logged, recorded, and cataloged. The weight of the situation was immense, but I felt a grim satisfaction. Every detail I had collected would serve to protect my children, secure my family's future, and ensure that she could not harm us any further. And when the day came to serve the papers, it would not be with anger, but with calculated certainty. Justice, finally, would be done. The next phase was just as critical as the evidence gathering: finances. Laura had always managed our accounts jointly, a seemingly innocent arrangement that now held the potential for manipulation. I couldn't afford to leave anything to chance that I began by meticulously reviewing bank statements, credit card records, and investment accounts. Every withdrawal, every transfer, even minor purchases were noted. When I found unexplained cash withdrawals or sudden trips that didn't match her explanations, I flagged them. These were small cracks that would later form a damning pattern. Harris assisted discreetly, confirming details and occasionally shadowing her when she made financial trips, like visiting the bank under the pretense of routine errands, only to meet with him or his friends. I discovered that she had been siphoning small sums here and there, just enough to seem innocuous, but over time, it added up to significant funds that in parallel, I compiled evidence of shared assets: the house, the cars, retirement accounts, and other investments. I cross-checked everything, making sure nothing was hidden or mislabeled. Rebecca emphasized that courts heavily favor the parent who demonstrates financial prudence and responsibility, and I intended to present myself as the stable, reliable pillar our children needed. Even the smallest details mattered. I photographed receipts, tracked suspicious credit card charges, and documented inconsistencies in her spending patterns. I also made notes of her interactions with the young man, especially any activity that suggested financial collaboration or shared resources. It painted a picture of not only moral corruption, but financial irresponsibility by the end of the week. I had a comprehensive dossier detailing both moral and fiscal failings. Every dollar, every message, every suspicious act would be presented in court if necessary. I felt the first real sense of control since discovering the affair. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about reclaiming the life we had built, protecting my children, and ensuring that the person who had endangered us would have no leverage left. Even with the evidence and finances secured, my primary concern remained the kids. I knew the divorce would hit them hard, and the revelation of their mother's betrayal, even partially, could shatter their trust and sense of security. My role was to shield them while slowly building resilience that I started with small conversations. Emma, 16, was perceptive and asked about conflicts she noticed at home. I kept my answers honest but age-appropriate. Sometimes adults make mistakes, I told her. But what matters is how we protect ourselves and each other. She nodded, swallowing the words like bitter medicine, and I knew she sensed more. Then I led on. Daniel, the oldest at 21, required a different approach. He was practically an adult, but the moral weight of what his mother had done could crush him if mishandled. We spent long evenings talking, sometimes heated, sometimes quiet. I explained that my aim wasn't revenge, it was justice, protection, and ensuring the family remained intact where it mattered most. The children, Jacob, 15, and Lily, 10, were younger and more impressionable. I maintained routines: homework, sports, bedtime stories. I watched for signs of anxiety, frustration, or confusion, gently addressing them without revealing the full depth of the betrayal. I wanted them to feel secure even as the foundation beneath us began to crumble. At the same time, I introduced the concept of boundaries. I explained that not all friendships or adult relationships were healthy, and that people sometimes made choices that could hurt others. I framed it not as a condemnation of their mother, but as a lesson in critical thinking, trust, and self-respect. Throughout this process, I kept detailed notes. Every conversation, every reaction, every concern they voiced was documented. This wasn't just for legal purposes. It was a way to track their emotional state and ensure that as the divorce progressed, they would not be blindsided by the end of the month. The children were beginning to understand subtle shifts. They didn't know the full story, but they trusted me to guide them. And in that trust, I found a strength I hadn't realized I still possessed. With the children emotionally stabilized and all evidence meticulously organized, I shifted focus to the final stages, the divorce filing and court strategy. This wasn't a simple separation. It was a calculated effort to ensure the safety, security, and future of my family. Rebecca and I met for several hours, going over every document, every photo, every message thread. She advised how to present the evidence, chronologically, emphasizing the pattern of deliberate betrayal and the risk posed to our children. She stressed that custody would be the linchpin. Everything else, assets, finances, even public perception, hinged on proving my moral and emotional reliability. That I double-checked all financial records. I made copies of bank statements, receipts, and logs showing her mismanagement and suspicious withdrawals. Every dollar that wasn't accounted for could potentially weaken my case, so I left nothing to chance. I even included notes from Harris about her clandestine meetings, carefully redacted to comply with legal standards. Next, I rehearsed the narrative I would present in court. Calm, composed, unwavering. I had to avoid anger or emotion. The law responds to facts, not outrage. Every time I imagined confrontation, I envisioned her defense faltering under the weight of documented proof, text messages, medical records, GPS logs, photos, and testimony from the private investigator. The children's well-being remained central to my strategy. I prepared a detailed custody plan, emphasizing stability, school routines, extracurriculars, emotional support, and healthcare. I anticipated objections from Laura, crafting responses that highlighted her recklessness and negligence, particularly regarding the exposure to sexually transmitted infections. That I also made contingency plans. Should she attempt manipulation, public scandal, or false claims, I had every countermeasure documented. Proof of financial responsibility, witnesses, logs of her activities, and surveillance. Every move she might make had been anticipated. By the time I returned home that evening, a sense of grim satisfaction had settled over me. The pieces were aligned. The path ahead was clear. When the filings went through, there would be no doubt. I had safeguarded my family, secured my children, and ensured that betrayal would not go unpunished. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a quiet moment of resolve. The end game was near, and when it came, it would be decisive. The day I filed the divorce papers, I felt a strange combination of relief and tension. Every step had been calculated, every detail documented, but handing the case to the court made everything painfully real. I arrived early at the courthouse, folders in hand, heart steady but mind racing with anticipation. Rebecca guided me through the process, ensuring that each document was properly submitted and that all evidence was cataloged for the judge. I watched as the clerk stamped the papers. Date, time, legal acknowledgement. It was official. Later that evening, I returned home. Laura was oblivious to the precise timing, but I could feel her unease. There was a subtle tension in the air, her usual casual demeanor now tinged with suspicion. She questioned trivial things, but I remained calm, carefully measured. I didn't reveal anything. Not yet. Daniel, perceptive as ever, noticed the shift immediately. We talked quietly in his room. I reassured him that while change was coming, I would always protect them. He nodded solemnly, a mix of understanding and sadness in his eyes. Lily and Jacob remained blissfully unaware of the full implications, but I made sure to keep routines normal, cushioning them from the immediate emotional impact. Within days, the first responses came. Laura's legal counsel attempted to challenge custody and assets, but the meticulous evidence left little room for maneuver. Every claim she made was easily countered by documents, logs, and verified information collected over months. I stayed composed, confident that the strategy one had built would prevail. Harris delivered more updates on her movements and behavior. Every slip, every attempt to cover her tracks, only strengthened my case. I didn't gloat, I didn't celebrate. I simply continued to protect my children and ensure that the legal process would reflect the truth of her actions. By the end of the week, a sense of inevitability settled in. Laura's facade was cracking. The truth was laid bare. The court would see her recklessness, her betrayals, and the dangers she had exposed. Our family too. And in that inevitability, I found a quiet satisfaction. Justice, meticulous and measured, was on its way. Court day arrived with a tension that hung over every interaction. Rebecca had prepped me thoroughly, going over every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every detail that could be challenged. I walked into the courtroom carrying only my composure, knowing the weight of truth was on my side. Laura sat across from me, her expression a mixture of feigned innocence and growing unease. Her lawyer tried to spin narratives, casting doubt, and attempting to manipulate emotions, but every claim they made was systematically dismantled by the documentation I had painstakingly collected. Harris testified, presenting a factual account of her clandestine meetings and the evidence of her reckless behavior. We submitted photos, GPS logs, and messages showing her repeated exposure of our children to risk. Rebecca cross-examined Laura with precision, highlighting inconsistencies, lies, and moral failures. Each point struck like a hammer against a fragile structure. The court also reviewed the financial records. Laura's mismanagement, questionable withdrawals, and spending patterns were laid bare. The judge questioned her directly on her actions, and her hesitation and evasive answers only further confirmed the meticulous record we had built. Throughout the proceedings, I remained calm. The children were cared for, shielded from the court's direct exposure. Daniel, as the oldest, was present but guided carefully, aware but protected. The judge took note of my proactive approach to custody, emphasizing stability, emotional support, and security for the younger children. By the end of the first day, it was clear the court recognized the magnitude of Laura's betrayal and her endangerment of the children. I could feel a sense of inevitability settling in. The meticulous planning, the patience, and the moral high ground had all positioned me for a decisive victory. Justice was no longer just a concept. It was tangible, imminent, and undeniable. The final court hearing was the culmination of months of meticulous preparation, evidence gathering, and emotional endurance. As the judge reviewed the extensive dossier, including messages, photos, surveillance reports, medical confirmations, and financial records, it became immediately apparent that Laura had no plausible defense. Custody was awarded entirely to me, with specific visitation rights carefully structured to protect the children's emotional well-being. Daniel, mature and understanding, occasionally accompanied the younger siblings for supervised visits, ensuring they maintained a connection without being exposed to her recklessness. Financially, Laura received only a minimal settlement, enough to survive temporarily, but she lost the house, the cars, and access to the accounts she had mismanaged. Her reputation, both socially and professionally, was shattered. Colleagues and acquaintances learned the full extent of her betrayal. She had no leverage, no standing, and no moral ground to stand on. Sitting with my children afterward, I felt a mix of relief and profound gratitude. The children, though initially shocked and saddened by the divorce, gradually understood that the decisions were made to protect them. They hugged me tightly, their trust reaffirmed, their belief in fairness and justice restored. I allowed myself a quiet reflection that evening. The betrayal had been staggering, the moral corruption appalling, and the emotional toll immense. Yet through careful planning, evidence, and a steadfast focus on protecting my family, I had emerged victorious, not just in court, but in safeguarding the integrity and future of my children. Life after the divorce was different but stable. Laura faded into the background, left with little but memories and the consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, I rebuilt the home and the family environment with patience, love, and unwavering dedication. ensuring that our children could thrive without fear or uncertainty. In the end, justice had been served, and I knew one unshakable truth. Some betrayals cannot be forgiven, and some actions demand accountability. I had done everything possible to ensure that both justice and my children's future were preserved.